Hi. So, welcome to the Craft and Business of Books. I'm Tetyana Denford.
And I'm Marissa Hussey.
And this is a show basically covering all the tools, the stumbling blocks, the tricks to the writing process, but also we're going to give you the behind the scenes perspective from the publishing side. And we're going to try and cover everything in between. So we are live every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. So remember to click to subscribe below. And also during the live show, I'll remind you, everyone that's watching, that you can send in questions and comments, and we will try and address them because we'll be able to see them. So today's show is about agenting. And more specifically, do I need an agent? And I get this question a lot because I think there's definitely a stigma and a worry about agents. It feels intimidating to people. And I think there's a way, I think, to explain how the process works and what agents really do, because I think that'll help people understand, is this the right path for me? You know, I think it's a tricky process, and I think, you know, it would be great to just say, listen, you know, agents are great, but you may not need one for this book, or, you know, you might. So I'm gonna throw that over to you, Marissa, because from the industry side, can you just please explain what an agent is? What is this thing about having an agent?
Well, I think the fastest way to sum it up is in 2 words: knowledge and advocacy. Right. So your agent is, or should be, your right-hand man for every step. You know, they are going to be your spiritual guide through the publisher process, and explain why everything is happening the way it is, and help you make the best decisions that you possibly can, because they're your encyclopedia of publishing knowledge. Right. And as for advocacy, you know, they're going to be the one to go to bat for you if something fails. There's a contractual obligation that's not met, or a verbal promise that's not being delivered on, and they will be the expert, you know, in the details of your contract, so that you know when that's happening.
Right.
So most agents I know are, you know, tenacious and ferocious, and have
basically scary cheerleaders.
Nice way, yeah. And they, you know, they have extremely high expectations, and they have to be that way because that is directly correlative to their annual income and yours. So, you know, that's their job.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think what people don't understand is the human aspect of agents, you know, because
that they are human. No.
Well, yeah, well, but that's the thing. I think people find it really intimidating to be like, okay, well, how do I present this body of work to someone who doesn't know me, who doesn't know how personal my story is? And you're kind of leaving yourself really open, and somebody's going to come back to you and say either yes, hooray, you know, or no, thanks. And that can be really, that can kind of leave people really vulnerable. And I think that's the thing that people are intimidated by, you know. And I mean, my experience, I was really lucky in a way, because in the beginning, when I was writing Motherland and I was really ready to start querying, and that's a whole other kind of thing that we can discuss in a different show. But, you know, I was really lucky because I got a lot of amazing rejections, and they were rejections, but they were kind and personal. And even if it was just one line, the fact that they took the time out to send me that, you know, over time, I realized that you learn that these people are doing a job. They're not, it's nothing personal. You know, they will look at something, and even if they love it, which, you know, a lot of agents probably do, right? You know, they can love something, but then they're working within a specific set of parameters within the industry, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are you know, it's a business, right? No matter what, at the end of the day, it is a business. Publishing is a business, and they're trying to make money, and agents are trying to make money. And if your book does not feel to them like they can securely place the next 2 years of their career and their income on you and your work, they're going to say no. And I think that's as a writer, you have to acknowledge that there's a space between the writing, the act of writing, the product of writing, and the book business. And from an agent's perspective, no matter what, I think we all know the relationship between the thanks but no thanks, in so many aspects of our lives, that it is something that you get a lot, and you have to face a lot, and it takes an incredibly mature person on both sides, I think, to communicate that well, and then to also receive it. And agents are in the incredibly difficult position of, oftentimes their no thanks is no thanks to your entire life's dream. And that's a hefty burden.
So deflating.
No, that's really that I couldn't put myself in those shoes. I don't know that I could do it. It's an emotional weight of theirs as well.
Wow.
And I think that's something that you have to really go into with eyes wide open, that it might be no.
Yeah. And in my experience, I remember that it was a few agents who said to me, well, this is great, and if we want to sell this, we're going to have to change it a bit. So can you come back and do, again, still really lucky that I was kind of given that advice. But at the same time, that can be a bit limiting, I think, for a writer, because they're thinking, well, should I change the story that I want to write for the market? But then you have a cheerleader who knows what they're doing, who's saying, I will sell this book, but you need to adjust it.
Yep.
It's really hard, because then you then have to make the decision. Do I still go with an agent? Because isn't that like some kind of a badge, right? Isn't that the dream? Suddenly you go, oh my God, I have an agent. That's it. I'm set.
Right.
That's just the beginning of the journey, I imagine.
Yeah, of course. I think one of the things that I see people do so often, and I would love to see people get past, is considering that like gotcha moment of like landing an agent as, this badge of honor, that it's, that's it. Okay, all done. Fine. I'm a success now.
It's like you're set on a path now,
When we're really, that's the beginning of your relationship with this person. And I think the best thing that you can do as an author is really do your due diligence on finding the right person for you, because you need to look at an agent's past successes. You need to look at them personally, what their personal interests are, what kinds of books that they work on. I think a sort of wide spray is one of the worst things that you can do. And you have to really make sure that you're going to make a connection with that person, and that person truly is the best person to represent your work.
Yeah.
Because you will find, that further down in the relationship, if that person is asking you to make changes to your work that don't feel right, that the relationship is not going to work. And if you end up with the right person, that shouldn't happen. You shouldn't find yourself compromising to a degree that you're truly unhappy with.
Sure.
Because you should have someone who you completely trust, because your agent is probably right? As far as you choose to go that route, and you do choose to try to get an agent, and you are successful in that, their breadth of knowledge in the industry is the reason that you partner with them.
Yeah.
You do need to trust them and their instincts and their recommendations, because they probably do know better. I think that's a difficult thing for people to admit and give over. Especially when it's something so personal as your writing. But they will know what is going to sell both to the publisher and to the public. And if that is your goal, you want to sell your book, then, there has to be an element of trust there.
But then the alternative. Now, the alternative is if you decide, well, okay, I'm not going to go with an agent. It's not necessarily a lesser plan or a plan B, but with self-publishing, you don't have that cheerleader. You know, you don't have
Sure.
that accountability coach. You have to do it yourself. You have to figure out how to get your book on a shelf. And I think it's hard to decide which path, because each has its own trickiness. You know, each is kind of difficult in its own way. You know, I mean, for me, I decided to self-publish because in the end, this particular story needed to be self-published because I didn't want to change it. And it was less about selling the book and more about connecting the story to people who would be moved by it.
Yes.
However, that doesn't mean that I am not going to query my second book and third or whatever. So I think it's really interesting that you have somebody who knows the industry really well, but does that mean that you are detached from it? I think that when you brought up the whole connecting your book with the right agent, I think you are involved emotionally as you can be, you know, to a degree, with that process, even being with the right agent.
Yes.
You know,
the what I said earlier about your agent sort of being your spiritual guide right through this process. Issue with that phrase. The ones I know, I think probably would be okay with it. It's, you know, you want to find that person who you can have that kind of symbiotic relationship with, who is not going to just sort of blindly make decisions, you know, and not involve you. You want someone who's going to be a true partner, and you are going to walk through every step of that together.
Completely. I also, now what I also want to cover is unsolicited submissions. So, and this is kind of part of it. When people say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to need an agent. I'm just going to send my manuscript to a publishing house.
Yeah.
Which used to happen a lot.
Yeah.
Hasn't happened in a long time. And the way I learned is kind of trial and error, because the research that you do in order to know how to submit, you end up coming across a lot of indie publishers and big publishers, and you think, oh, I just want to send it to them directly. Does that work like that anymore? Is it even remotely possible for an author a writer to send their manuscript to a publishing house?
Well, I can tell you that as someone who has typically in their career been on the other side of a lot of like random email addresses that are published on publisher websites, now plenty of people send you unsolicited manuscripts. I've seen a lot. Unfortunately, I had never had any power over that. So, those were misplaced emails. But on a serious note, of course, there are lots of imprints, individual imprints that will open up to unsolicited manuscripts, for a period of time, either as a sort of a marketing campaign or just out of genuine interest. They're typically not terribly well advertised. You really have to kind of go crawling through publisher websites and blogs and, follow editors on social media and see if they're talking about it, and then maybe you'll come across some of those opportunities.
Sorry to interrupt. Do they do that? Do they only do it for a limited time because they would be inundated?
I mean, certainly I would think that's the instinct. I don't know if that ends up being true. I certainly couldn't speak for everyone. When I've seen it done, it's been reasonable and for the most part really, really beneficial and powerful for the publishers.
Right.
But there are lots of different ways to do that. Anything from sort of very elaborate campaigns with form submissions to just hey, email us here. So right. I think there are so many different ways people have done that. Yeah. There are some other cases where you would not necessarily go the traditional path, right? Yeah. So, for example, if a publisher goes directly to an author, like a journalist or a historian, who right. Is an expert in a particular subject they want to publish a book in. That doesn't necessarily mean that an agent doesn't eventually get involved. Just the ignition of the project might be a little bit different than you would normally think. So yes, of course, there are cases where if you put yourself out there as an expert in something, you may be approached. But yeah, overall, certainly with any of the big publishers, the traditional publishers, and if that is where you want to be published, yes, it's pretty much going to work that you need an agent, and they're not, the opportunities for an unsolicited manuscript to make its way through that process and end up being, on the bestseller list, rare. Yeah.
And I think I've heard you say before, just in kind of conversations between you and I, that you have to have a specific vision for your book at a certain point in the process, which I think is really important as a writer anyway. But I think the end goal, it's really easy for writers to compare themselves to bestsellers or award winners and be like, oh, I want that. But actually knowing what you want your story to do and where you see your book going is probably a really important thing to then say, okay, am I going to spend my energy querying and making it perfect so that I get an agent? Or is it different? Do I just want this book in the hands of people, which means I self-publish? Do you know what I mean? I think that specific energy needs to be spent in the writing process or the polishing up process as to where do I want my book to go.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately that's the answer, right, to our question, right, of do you need an agent? It is really something that you need to reflect on and think really carefully on, because, if you're a writer who is just starting out and you want to get your work published, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't try to get it.
Definitely.
However, if you don't have expectations of being published by a massive publisher and, having some grand marketing budget behind you, which I will tell you straight, is probably not going to happen. Okay.
I love these truth bombs. Hang on. Before you go this way, I'm just going to stop you right here and tell you the truth.
Well, I want people to be able to make these decisions based on real information. And, I don't mean to be a cynic about it, but the honest answer is that every single book a publisher publishes cannot be on the bestseller list. It cannot be in the top 10. It cannot have a massive marketing budget behind it. And I think it's really up to you as a writer, as a person, to look and be incredibly self-aware in that and understand where your work falls.
Yeah.
In terms of importance to other people, and marketability to other people. Its ability to be sold to other people. Because that is the point at which if you can answer those things positively and you can say yes to that, then the publisher as a business is something you should embark on. That's a relationship you should embark on.
Yeah.
You don't see it in that way. You don't think that your book is going to be this next blockbuster, this, in the number 1 New York Times bestseller. You need to look really carefully at that whole process and whether it works for you and your work. And if you think that you're going to land on a publisher's list, in the middle of the list, and you paid a mediocre amount of money for the work that you just poured your life into, then I think you should seriously consider another route and some version of self-publishing or hybrid publishing and doing it on your own, because there are so many routes to market now that don't require that massive machine behind you. So if you're a savvy marketer, you're a smart person who understands the internet and that you can get your head around basics like Facebook advertising and Google advertising and email marketing, I don't see why you wouldn't consider that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to close this in summary, is that, agents are just trying to do their job.
Yeah.
They want to market something that sells. Mm-hmm. It is a really difficult and raw process from the writer's perspective. It feels personal, even though from their end it's not. And I think when you approach it as a writer, even when you think of it with a specific plan about what you want your book to do, I think it almost helps you not take it personally.
Sure.
If that makes sense. I think it helps coach you in realizing that, okay, not this time, next time. You can query the same author with 10 different books. That's the thing. Like, it just has to hit at the right time and kind of where the parameters are in the industry at the time, I think. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah.
Okay, right. So next segment will be what makes this book great.
Okay, so Normal People is Sally Rooney's second book. It was first published in hardback in August 2018, in paperback last year, and has won several awards, including the Costa. The Independent of Ireland estimates sales across the US, UK, and Ireland at 12 million euro. Australia recently reported an additional 100,000 copies sold. It was recently adapted for television by the BBC, which I just found out that there was a crew member's job, which was intimacy coordinator. And now I am questioning every decision I've ever made in my life. Tetyana, as a writer.
It's a great title to have on a business card.
Right? It's a lot better than digital marketing director. I think. So as a writer, tell us what makes this book great. Okay.
So personally, I didn't actually like the book, but hear me out. I didn't like the technique. So what turned me off, and I think this is what makes the book a little bit divisive for people, is from my perspective as a writer, I really did not like the run-on sentence style, because it felt like a diary that just wouldn't stop. And but the funny part is that as much as I didn't like that, there were jewels, like moments of joy from me in the way Sally Rooney describes conversations and actions, and the way you could almost see the hairs on somebody's neck, or the way they lick a spoon, or you are welcomed into their relationship. You are welcomed into their pain. It's so intimate in that way. So as much as I didn't like it, I think what for me makes it great is that it's a study in belonging. It's a study in somebody saying, like, I know you can feel this because I know you've been through this. I thought that was really, really clever. What about you?
Well, full disclosure, I have not read this book.
That's it. That ends. That's it. Okay.
Yeah. Because I have, of course, read every book I have ever worked on cover to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's, of course, not physically possible. And now I am 8 months pregnant and I have a 3-year-old. So from what I understand, I'm going to get to this book in 2031.
Yeah.
So, from my perspective, what I can tell you is what I know about its launch and what, how it was received in the industry. And I can see the hype that was, created around it. And a lot of that comes from within the industry. And, somebody gets a book that they just really sink their teeth into, and the stars begin to align, where you have both independent booksellers and also, people in supermarkets recommending a book. That's kind of the holy grail of publishing, right? And that's when you know you're going to have a bestseller on your hands. And part of that is positioning the book, and it just by nature of its being, it becoming a sort of like status symbol, right? We know that there were lots of celebrities posting about having the book on Instagram. All of my friends just were saying how it was just everywhere for them. Like they couldn't escape it. Everyone was posting about it on social media. And in publishing, word of mouth is still such a massive driver of sales, despite how frustratingly intangible that is. And, there's an interesting thing with it being a status symbol, but particularly among millennials.
That's so true. Yeah. Completely.
From what I understand, of the story now, and I did to be fair, I did start listening to it the other day. Is kind of deeply millennial, right? There is this awareness of no happy ending, which I think reflects something that is, emerging in society now, which is this growing comfort with gray areas, right? Everything is not completely forward. This is, not the 1950s anymore. Things are complex, and there are compromises everywhere, but people still want love stories. And that's at its core, that's still what this is. It's just a cool love story. So.
Yeah, and do you think that was why it was such a lightning rod for not only writers, readers, but also the industry? Like suddenly it highlighted something very real and very poignant. And especially now, it's funny because when the BBC, we saw it as a series, it happened at a moment in the world where people felt like they needed connection. They started feeling really nostalgic during lockdown, kind of looking back at their pasts and kind of thinking, gosh, I was that person, or I had that kind of relationship. Do you think they saw that being so, wow, that's interesting.
I absolutely. I mean, that one of the things that, of course, makes a novel special is when people can connect with the writing, right? And they, and I think that one of the similarities I would draw here is, between Gone Girl, where you're reading that book and the whole beginning, you're thinking, this is my marriage, this is my relationship. Yeah. And then very quickly you realize it is not your marriage. Hopefully it's not your marriage, and you're free of the criminal justice system right now, but you have that sort of like that sparkle, that fizz that comes when you give people that feeling that they just have to talk about it. They have to say something about, and tell someone about what their opinion is, about how the book made them feel. Sorry, so look, I even get because I'm sort of, channeling all of those conversations about books that I've worked on like this, like Where'd You Go, Bernadette? And, they're these things you have to talk about with someone. And that's when you get that magic, that alchemy, when you have, someone coming into a bookshop and asking, oh, I just finished this, I don't know what I'm going to read next, and the employee in the bookshop they know exactly what they're going to say now because it's top of mind for them. They're still feeling it, and they need to say, this is the book that you need to read right now. I think
that person may not like it, but they will remember it.
Of course, it's such a visceral feeling that some books like this leave you with, that you have to share it with someone else. Yeah. And one of the things that I read that I thought was really interesting was that it was in an article, I think it was in the Guardian, that an employee at Hatchard's had said that it was one of the first books that she'd ever seen people coming in and buying in multiples.
Wow.
They were buying them for their friends, their siblings, their mother, which That's is amazing. I think it's a really interesting thing. So.
Wow. Cool. Right. Well, we'd love to know what you guys think about Normal People. So anytime we do What Makes This Book Great, just drop us some comments about what you thought, if you hated it, if you loved it, why. Yeah, it'll be really great. And
we'll have an opinion on it.
Yeah. and we'll definitely respond to those as well. So that's it for us on this episode of The Craft and Business of Books. Tune in live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And remember to subscribe in the link below so that you get alerted ahead of every broadcast. I think that's it. What do you think, Marissa?
That's it. See you guys next week.
Cool.